And we'll start, Colleen, if you would introduce yourself, introduce the measure, and tell us briefly what it would do.
Sure. Mine just like talking to y'all.
Yeah, just talk to us.
All right.
Yep.
My name is Colleen Carroll, and I'm a volunteer with the campaign Eviction Representation for All, which is a yes vote on Measure 26238. Yeah, it's important to say that I'm a volunteer and that the campaign is volunteer and tenant-led.
Could you tell us what you do when you're not a volunteer? Are you employed? Do you have an occupation?
I do. Is it important?
Yeah, we'd like to know who we're talking to.
Sure. Okay, I'll say it this way. Yes, I'm a researcher and I research evictions. I do not represent my employer when I'm here, but I spend my entire day researching evictions.
You work for a law firm?
No, I work for Portland State University.
Gotcha.
But I do not represent Portland State.
Right.
It's just very
you're
important.
a researcher at PSU, and what do you research?
Evictions.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
Like nationally, globally?
No, here in Oregon. Yeah. So I look at the process of what happens in eviction court specifically, what it looks like every day for tenants in eviction court. I look at, I'm a part of a team that looks at trends of evictions.
And what department are you in at PSU?
The Center for Urban Studies.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's okay. It is very important that because that's public
we
university.
understand that this is entirely a volunteer effort. So please tell us a little bit about what Measure 26238 would do.
Sure. So it would bring a program that is called it would bring a right to counsel for tenants in eviction court to Multnomah County. So right now there is no right to counsel for tenants. The right to counsel movement is something that's spreading across the United States. It started in New York City in 2017, but has been implemented in many, many jurisdictions across the United States since, including San Francisco, Philadelphia, Kansas City, many, many others. And what it is basically attempting to address is the disparity in legal representation between landlords and tenants in eviction court, because the legal process is so important to housing outcomes and to keeping people housed and preventing people from becoming houseless and remaining houseless. Having an eviction on your record is one of the hardest things to come back from. If we want to create long-term housing stability, we need to reduce the amount of eviction judgments as well as eviction filings. And having a lawyer is very good at that, because in fact, most of the cases that make it to eviction court are divertible or preventable. And having a lawyer makes it possible for tenants to seek the options, including rent assistance, stipulated agreements, or other ways of resolving that don't end in an eviction on their record. One of the ways that this happens, that having a lawyer helps this the most, is preventing what's called default evictions. That's about 25% of the evictions in Multnomah County right now. That's 1 in 4 that ends before a judge hears a single thing about the case, anything about it, just because the tenant wasn't able to make it to court that day. They may have already moved out. Many tenants move out and assume that that's the end of the plate, that's the end of what needs to be done, and then they end up with a judgment of eviction on their record anyway, even after they've moved out.
Can we slow you down just for a second? Just because a lot of people watching this online won't know, could you please explain the taxing mechanism, how it would work, and how much money you expect it to raise?
Sure. So, I'll say, the measure funds eviction representation for every tenant. It also funds a couple of other things, including emergency rental assistance to make those stipulated agreements more possible and more useful, so that there's some funding allocated to that, as well as the legal fees. There's a thing in Oregon where the legal fees of the winning party in a civil case get deferred to the losing party. And so in most cases, it's the landlord who wins, and those legal costs and fees get deferred to the tenant. And so we have allocated some funds to pay off the legal fees of winning landlords when the fight is, lawyer to lawyer and more reasonable, that tenants shouldn't bear the cost because that's a hardship to them, and landlords who win square and fair should have their legal fees paid off as the legal system requires it. And so there's also funding to pay off the legal fees of landlords who win cases at court. And those, so all together, that's the package. It's legal, it's rent assistance, representation, and it is paid. Yes, I'll get to the part. It is paid.
The breakdown of those 3 buckets, please.
Oh yeah. The majority of it will go to the program, legal representation, approximately $8 million. That's the cost to run the program that we came up with using Stout Financial's tools, and Stout Financial has done cost benefit and operation reports for many other right to counsel programs. And so we use their tools to estimate what it would cost to run ours, and it's about $8 million. And then the remainder gets split up
So the amount it would raise on an annual basis?
between 12 and 15 million.
Between 12 and 15 million.
Okay.
And within the city of Portland?
County of Multnomah.
Right, within the county of Multnomah, I mean, who would be the revenue department responsible for assessing and collecting these?
That's up to the county.
So it would be the counties
It's up to the county to make that decision.
about whether they do it or they drop it to someone?
Well, they've said they farm it out to the city.
Yeah.
That's one option.
Okay, and can you please explain the taxing mechanism?
It's a increase on the tax on capital gains by 0.75%. So capital gains are things like not wages, things like stocks, bonds, and the sale of assets. And those are already, people already report those if you live in Oregon. Therefore, if you live in Multnomah County in Oregon, you're already calculating and reporting your capital gains. And this is a increase by 0.75%.
You said that this provides a right to counsel for tenants. Tenants currently have a right to counsel.
Not in civil court.
It actually wouldn't create a right to counsel. It would create available counsel, but the right to counsel is not there.
So Gideon, which is there is a criminal right to counsel.
Correct.
Mhm.
There is not for civil. And so
So right
Yeah.
now, pardon my ignorance, if
No, it's
I'm a
okay.
tenant and a landlord wants to evict me and goes to court, I can't pay for my own lawyer to represent me?
oh yes, you can.
Right,
You can also call the county and access an attorney that way.
right. So again, this is providing funds to hire lawyers, not that someone couldn't do that on their own, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then you've talked about how there are right to counsels elsewhere in the country, New York City. Are there other jurisdictions in the country that have created special taxing districts using capital gains to fund lawyers for tenants who are getting evicted?
Not capital gains. Other places have used a vacancy tax. So looking at taxing vacant units or a rental unit.
So give me an example of a municipality that does.
It was Boulder, and it's not a vacancy tax. My apologies. It's a rental tax. So it's a tax on every rental unit in Boulder, Colorado.
Every rental unit in Boulder pays a tax to whatever county that is. I don't know if it's Boulder County.
Yeah, $75 they pay.
And that money is used for right to counsel. Any other examples that you're aware of?
Lots of places use. Let me think.
The National Right to Counsel has a matrix
Yes.
on this. I think of the 16 or so jurisdictions that have this, I believe it's all but 2 use general fund or use federal grants to pay for it. So there's the per unit tax, and I think isn't it?
But
San
no one has used
Francisco?
capital gains.
Correct.
No.
Why you? Not you.
Yeah, why not me?
Yeah.
Because the reality of using general funds is very, very hard. So places like San Francisco and other places, even after instituting a right to counsel and saying it has to be fully funded, you have to fight year over year to get that funding actually allocated.
With all due respect, that wasn't my question.
Okay.
Why not some other funding mechanism like a room tax or a vacancy tax? Why did you focus on capital gains?
Because they are undertaxed.
Capital gains are undertaxed?
They are taxed less than wages at the federal level.
Right.
And that capital gains, the fact of capital gains are highly concentrated in the hands of the wealthy. And so Oregon Center for Public Policy released a wonderful report that talked about how capital gains themselves are a driver of inequality because they are a way of making money that highly favors people who already have money. If you have money, you buy stocks, you make more money. You have money, you buy a property, you make more money. And so, as identified as a driver of inequality and an undertaxed, asset, that seemed like a fair and just way to pay for this program.
So if this is passed, would this fund a certain amount of eviction lawyers?
It would fund enough eviction lawyers and paralegals. It would also fund paralegals to provide legal representation for every tenant who has a notice of termination in the county, yes.
So is it a system by where the county would know how many people had been not the target, but had been mentioned in eviction filings, and then they would go seek those people out, or would it be incumbent upon the people facing eviction to reach out to the county to get legal access?
The first. And so our program starts at stage of notice of termination, not at court filing. It's too late by the time the cases get to court. So it actually has to be available at notice of termination. And so at the stage of notice of termination, landlords are required to file a copy with the county. And so that's something that's new. And then that triggers the 5 community-based organizations and nonprofit law firms who will have the legal representation teams to do outreach.
What are the CBOs that have?
They'll have to be like a request,
Okay.
a request proposal.
And is that where the administrative costs come in? I assume the CBOs are going to get paid.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's a tenant resource office, and then they will contract with no less than 5 nonprofit law firms and CBOs.
Why did you make the measure retroactive?
It was not meant to be retroactive. If we filed in time to make it onto the November ballot, we were sued by the PBA for some small language in the title. That lawsuit delayed us long enough that we were not able to make it on the November, and so we're on the May. It was never intended to be retroactive. There's a full year implementation written in, and we absolutely, now that we're on the May measure, expect the county and hope the county takes the full year to implement it and not apply it retroactively.
I only want to let the other side get a chance to. I just have one broader question, and you're a good person to answer because you study this stuff. As you look across the country, as you look at the top 25 cities in America, where do our landlord-tenant laws sit? And I say this only because I'm of the impression, and I'm happy to have you correct me, informed by Michael Marcus, who's dearly departed, who was the judge who wrote a book about landlord-tenant rights, that Portland tenants have more rights than almost any other city in the country, which doesn't necessarily mean they don't need representation in an eviction court, but as a general matter, on the range of landlord-tenant rights, how is Portland? Because if Michael Marcus is wrong, I'd like to know that. Because here was a progressive urban liberal who claimed that we had some of the strongest tenant protections in America. And we actually wrote a story about it at the time. So if we're wrong, I'd love to know.
I don't know that I don't know that I'm able to answer that question. Sorry, I'm just going to take a minute because I find that to be a really, really hard question, which is, so there's 2 parts of it. One is rights are only as good as, the rights are only as meaningful as we are able to defend them. And that's the reality, is that it is very hard to defend any rights that may be. If you don't know how. And an eviction court very specifically, housing in general includes lots of law and that kind of stuff, but an eviction court specifically, there is no right for a tenant there's no way for a tenant to talk about how their rights might be violated. Habitability issues, if a bad claim is made against them, the worst thing that happens is that the case is dismissed. There is no way for a tenant to this landlord has, served me with an illegal notice 6 times, and I have to deal with the consequences of that, right? And so eviction court, which is about possession, is really narrowly restricted to answering that question, and tenants, there are other options, there are other things that we could do, like some of the programs that might be available but that tenants don't know how to access. And in the absence of having somebody support them through that process, we are allowing preventable evictions to happen, and accepting that and accepting the downstream costs of it. So that's what we're trying to prevent, which is currently large amounts of preventable evictions and displacements are happening in our community, and we are bearing the cost of it, through all of the downstream impacts of eviction. And this would prevent that and allow people to access whatever rights that they have.
Last question. In New York City, they have this right. How do they pay for it? Out of the general fund?
I don't remember if
They pay for it out of the
Yeah,
general fund.
okay. All right, let's give the No Chance an opportunity. Please introduce yourselves. Whoever's going to talk, please introduce yourself and explain your opposition.
Sure. Good afternoon. Andrew Hone, President and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, and joined by my colleagues that are supporting a no vote on this measure with the Building Our Futures Together coalition. The Alliance is Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce with well over 2,100 members, with our affiliates Downtown Portland Clean and Safe and the Charitable Institute, where Partners in Diversity resides. We are the most diverse and large business coalition within the region. And just by way of background, so you know exactly who I am, my first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Vista, a national service, working in New York City at the largest provider of free legal services, including eviction representation. I then worked for the largest provider of homelessness services in New York City as well, Volunteers of America. And then it was nearly 3 years ago, almost precisely to the date, that our organization advanced and supported Here Together, amongst one of the largest and most diverse coalitions, to put a ballot in front of the voters to pass the largest per capita expenditure on homelessness services in the nation. I was here in front of this board itself, in particular, amongst all other of the editorial boards, to advance that measure, which was a unifying voice to be able to solve the problems that we face, including $250 million dedicated to prevent as well as to solve chronic homelessness in our region. So there's my background. We obviously in this region are at a significant inflection point, economically speaking and demographically speaking. In just 2 days post the payment of all taxes, this is the only location in the country that has 4 separate income taxes. We pay the effective highest rate in the nation at 14.7% of local income, with our starting rate being at $125,000 for individuals. And so we are obviously impacted significantly, and a capital gains tax on top of that would add substantial burden to our local taxpayers, residents. And while we don't disagree at all whatsoever with the need for tenants to have free civil legal representation, this tax would be an absolute burden to our region. And not just that, we know that the cause and the reason that we have a housing crisis within our region is because our housing is categorically one of the most expensive in the nation. This capital gains tax is not just stocks and bonds. This capital gains tax is on housing. It's on the withdrawal of funds from your retirement account in an emergency. It's a tax on small businesses, on the sale of assets, and on the small business itself. This capital gains tax not only impacts the actual cause and the driver of homelessness and our affordable housing crisis, it is detrimental to the actual economic vibrancy of this region.
So let's talk about the housing issue for a second. I think it's actually a matter of some debate whether or not the tax applies to the sale of homes.
There is zero debate on that, and I'd let my colleagues in the realtors.
If they could point to exemption language in there similar to what we have in the Oregon State Tax Code or in the federal tax code, like that would be clear. But I think you acknowledge that while it might not be the intention, would need to be patched later.
Yeah, so as it stands now, on your primary residence, if you are a Multnomah County resident and you sell your home, and remember this is retroactive, and to date in Multnomah County, according to the Regional Multiple Listing Service, we've had 1,943 resident transactions already closed for the year who would not know that they'd owe this capital gains tax.
Colleen, why don't you respond to that?
Yeah, capital gains are already reported in Oregon, and there are two ways to wonder how this could get implemented. We can wonder if the county will use the way that it is already collected and increase it by 0.75%, or if they will create a new way of collecting capital gains tax. All of the calculations and work done on this was based on how capital gains are already taxed, including the exemptions for primary residents. And that's how we expect, and we will fight to have this implemented. We agree, we absolutely agree, this should not impact the sale of primary residence homes.
But
As it is written right now, it taxes primary residences.
So Colleen, it is, I understand you say that your intention is to advocate for that position, but that's not what voters are going to be voting on. Voters are going to be voting on a measure that is silent on that point, just as voters are going to be voting on a measure that is retroactive. So these are two gaping loopholes or problems with this measure.
We did not redefine capital gains as they are defined in Oregon.
You don't reference Oregon though, nor do you reference, like other tax measures would reference, including all of the other parts related to that. There's no language in the measure that says it should be the definition and also in conformity. That's a word that appears in some other tax measures. Conformity with the way that those are actually implemented within a jurisdiction. It just says, look at the definition of what is a net capital gain.
Who wrote the ballot measure?
It was a collection of probably about 15 or 20 of us with the support of a legal team.
We also provided, I know that you have copies of this, if not, we can provide it already, that the largest local accounting firm in the region has already analyzed this and very clearly determined that yes, this does tax housing. And so this is not a debate. This is a increase in the cost of housing and already over.
It's an increase in the cost of the profit people make from the sale of housing at its worst. And there's 2 points that I will say. Look, I agree that we did not copy down every word of how capital gains are currently taxed and put it back into this. It is but there are 2 points, there are a couple of points that I'll point to. One, the city of Portland has released a report that I think everybody's familiar with looking at this. And the city of Portland also says that this tax will impact less than 8% of Multnomah County residents or less than 15% of Multnomah County taxpayers.
Not cumulatively, that's for each year of implementation, because it can vary.
And we have no
Okay,
idea who those 8% are.
Right.
Right, but that's what we're saying, is that capital gains are a very, impact a very few amount of people in our communities. Not many people make any capital gains of any type.
Well, but I assume that if you sell your house, no matter how little of an income you have or how little the price is, you will have to pay a tax.
You may, if the county decides to collect capital gains in a new way. That the county would have to make a change.
No, they would just have to follow the plain language of the ballot measure that you would put on the ballot.
Or they could choose
Well, here,
to
let me
apply,
ask this.
they could choose to apply the
As
exemptions.
one of the authors of the bill, was it your intent to tax people
No.
who are on Social Security, who own a home worth $200,000, you sell it to pay a capital gains tax?
No, it was not our intention
But
to,
that is what this measure will do.
could do if the counny
Will do.
will.
Can I ask a point? Just can I get the math straight? Just if you make $200,000, so say your house, make $200,000, you're gonna owe $1,500, right?
Thank you.
Under the current rate, but keep
Yes.
in mind that's before
That's if you take
factoring
the
in.
0.75%, right? That's what you're looking at.
Which,
Okay.
based on, this is the first time we've heard the breakdown of how the revenue would be used. I didn't hear in there an accounting for the cost to collect, which we now understand from the city of Portland would be on the order of about $7 million a year. So, and with $19 million in estimated startup costs to set up that collection system, the state, frankly, is not interested in adding this as a line to the state tax form or doing that collection work. That hasn't been accounted for. So you're not going to have the revenue required. You would hardly have $8 million left over for the attorneys, let alone the other services called for in the program. So we assume that this will mean that the rate will need to go up almost immediately.
And there's provision for the rate to go up?
The measure requires the county to annually analyze the program and then make a recommendation to the board on a rate adjustment. So annually, the board will need to consider adjusting it one way or another, and we assume it will go up.
Yeah,
And this
translation
program-
for common consumption is that before this even gets out of the gate, this thing's underwater as a tax. It's the first ever tax in the nation to pay for a tax. And that doesn't even get past the collection costs. You add on the administration costs from the county and the providers that we mentioned, you could be looking at doubling or tripling the tax rate before you even start the program.
Colleen, I want to shift a little bit. So in your research, I believe, well, let me ask you about your research. What is the most common cause of eviction?
Filings for non-payment of rent.
So if people can't pay their rent, why does having a lawyer help them?
Sorry, I do want to just go back and say, okay. Okay. There are lots of reasons. Okay, so we can reduce the amount of filings by making sure that people have access to the services that they need before it even gets to court. Many non-payment cases are 1 month where somebody is struggling to pay rent. Having access to applying to emergency rental assistance, but knowing that they are not also trying to understand and fight the legal system at the same time is really important. If the case gets to court, having a lawyer help you negotiate a stipulated agreement is the #1 way that we can resolve these issues. Those stipulated agreements right now are extremely coercive when one side, the landlord side, has a lawyer and the other side doesn't. So those stipulated agreements can dictate terms and a behavior beyond the claim that brought people to court in the first place. And so they have to agree to payments and behaviors months in advance, and if they can't comply, that becomes immediately a judgment of eviction. In other places, what we see is that lawyers make the stipulated agreements more fair. Having a lawyer on both sides, that we address the issue that's on the complaint, either making sure that the landlord accepts the late rent that the tenant now has available, asking if there are other habitability questions, like is there a reason that rent was not paid? So there's like life things, but there's also tenants who withhold rent because their electricity isn't working. We know that right now tenants have to sue their landlords, and we see a lot of those cases. Reach CDC is being sued, I think, no less than 3 times right now because tenants have no other way to say, please fix the stove, please fix the electricity. If you withhold rent, which is legal in Oregon, and you get to court and you don't know how to process and explain, I'm withholding rent because there's something wrong with my apartment, that can end in an eviction. Again, by preventing defaults and making the stipulated agreements more fair and less coercive. The other thing that happens in stipulated agreements is that the landlord's tenant or agent will include their fees. And so if a tenant repays their whatever, gets up to date on their rent, but is not able to pay the additional $200 or $300 for the cost of the landlord's lawyer, they can be non-compliant with the stipulated agreement and get the eviction because they failed to pay for the landlord's lawyer. And so having a lawyer on your side, and when we look at the stipulated agreements that have lawyers on both sides, each side bears their own costs, and so tenants aren't at risk of having to pay the landlord's lawyer fees. So stipulated agreements is the #1 way. making sure that the payment plans are fair and reasonable, and that they don't include other requirements outside of the notice of the claim. Having support to understand how to explain to a judge, I've applied for rental assistance, or also explain, I tried to do this and that the landlord didn't accept it. The rules of evidence and the rules of procedure of the courts are very, very, very difficult. Every judge in eviction court says, this is a very technical area of the law. You have a high likelihood of losing not on the merits of the case, but on the process. So judges will say, that may be true, or that sounds really bad, but you didn't file your evidence correctly, or you didn't do one of the steps, the legal steps correctly, and therefore I can't consider it. And so lawyers make sure that the process is fair, including for non-payment of rent.
All of this we should agree with, but the point about rental evictions being no payment, absolutely correct, well stated. We have a tax in place right now that provides rental assistance. We have a tax in place right now that provides funding for eviction representation. This is a duplicate.
And also has qualifications built into it for, making sure that our most vulnerable have access to those programs.
And the state just added another 33 million, I think, to the emergency rent assistance pool under HB 2001.
So emergency rental assistance and the ability to access it are two different things. In 2022, 9% of tenants in Multnomah County had lawyers.
I'm sorry?
9% of tenants in Multnomah County had lawyers in eviction court. So these programs that exist are failing, are not enough. We are saying that we accept the displacement levels that are happening in court every day. So imagine going to court today and seeing 50 or 60 cases on the docket. And maybe two or three of those tenants have lawyers. That's an unacceptable disparity and leading to an unacceptable amount of displacement and downstream costs.
So we're seeing, we've been reporting on Multnomah County consistently underspending its supportive housing services money. Some of that money is set aside for rental assistance, for emergency rent. I mean, Andrew's point about this being duplicative seems to be the case.
And can I just add a note here just about this? We have all sorts of systems that aren't working in our community right now. You spend 5 minutes on hold with 911. That is unacceptable. But we're not inventing a sales tax to pay for 911. I think the idea that we're all frustrated around the expedience of the services that we're rendering in our community with the resources that we have is completely agreed upon. No one should sit around here and say we celebrate what is happening right now in terms of service delivery. But we're not creating a nearly imaginative and winging a new capital gains tax in our region in order to provide a service that already is codified through an existing high income tax on businesses as well. So I think this is a general point of case where it's like we're all frustrated. And just to the point about, we totally agree, half of the issue about an eviction is that no one is being told about the services that they can access if they want. This literally happened 3 weeks ago with HB 2001, which requires landlords to transmit in multiple languages what those programs are. Half of this is a deficit of knowledge, and we completely agree. There is a demand and a need, and guess what? There's also the resources to pay for it. That is what the primary issue is here, instead of creating a completely imaginary tax that has no validity within any actual sense of the word.
So, your argument is Multnomah County's doing a bunch, they're just not doing enough, right? So did you go to the county and say, we'd like you to spend another $8 million a year on lawyers? And they said, go screw yourself, and you said, fine, we're going to pass a tax?
I think for 2 years we have been talking loudly about this. We sat with legislators, we asked them, and they said, bring money to the table. I think it's just a fake thing to say that, that people who live in this community and who are impacted by this issue wanted this fight. We didn't want this fight. This was the fight this is all that was left available to us. Lobbying statewide legislators, talking with local legislators, said there isn't the political will, you have to bring money on the table. And for 2 years we've been talking about it. If it was so easy as Andrew is making it out to be, saying we'll just take some of the money that already exists and move it over, I think we all would hope that the county commissioners or the city of Portland would have done it. And for the 2 years that we've been collecting signatures, talking, lobbying, we have over 60 endorsements. People are trying every avenue. This is the only avenue that was left that said the voters of Multnomah County say that this level of displacement, the amount of eviction that is happening in our community is unacceptable. And the continued lack of willingness or action on the part of the commissioners of the city, this is all that was left available to us. And everybody, when passing a ballot measure, everybody we talked to said you have to pay for it somehow, because otherwise, I think it's a bad idea to use ballot measures and just say, do this, do this, do this. We'll have hundreds and hundreds of ballot measures that say general fund, general fund, general fund. It's the only way. It's easier. Would I have had a smaller fight on my hands? Probably. But capital gains are a real type of money that real people make, and we could target them, and that's why we did.
I realize that your life has not been devoted to thinking about this issue, but you're aware that Portland has either the highest or second highest marginal tax rates in the country. Is there any point at which we just, from your point of view, we start taxing ourselves too much and create an economic disincentive to live here? And
I think the economic disincentive to live here is a 14% rent increase, right? I agree that it is getting more and more expensive to live here.
But I'm asking a different question. At any point, do you think it becomes possible that despite all the good programs we're funding with our tax money, that we're just taxing ourselves too much and
honestly, not until we get to the tax rates of the 1950s, which were about 50%. Like when social programs worked in the United States.
Well, I'm asking you to compare us to other cities.
I don't think, no, I think that if we want to pay, I think that there is an example of how we can pay for solid social services, and it's by taxing at levels and concentrated in high areas of wealth at the level that we need. And the last time that happened was like around in the 1950s, and we were taxing at 40 or 50%. I think that's probably when. But in the meantime, I do think it's important to talk about, we're talking about an increase of a tax of less than 1%. My rent is going up 14%. That, right? Somebody had asked about what are the numbers? The sale of any asset, stocks, bonds, all of those assets, would have to be $500,000 in a year, right? You would have to sell and profit $500,000 in capital gains to pay around $3,000 on this tax, right? $500,000, $3,000. The average apartment in Multnomah County, $1,800 at 14% increase, is the same amount. So renters are already being asked to bear a $3,000 annual cost of living increase, right? And that's every renter in every apartment. Our rent's going up $3,000.
That's not true. That's the allowable increase.
That's the allowable increase.
So Colleen, let me ask you a different question. In the measure, it says that you need to hold 18 months of reserves. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty familiar with government budgets. I can't find any example of any government program that holds that level of reserves. So could you explain that?
That was put in there so that a year where there was an economic, downturn, the program wouldn't fall out from under itself, right? And so.
Well, we've seen almost every decade we see a dramatic drop in capital gains. They go almost to zero in Oregon twice over the past 20 years, and that brings us back to an original question we haven't really talked about, which is this is a very volatile source of revenue. Why would you build a tax for something that is as important as you describe it to be on a funding stream that is so volatile? Because
on the good years, lots of people make lots of money. So yeah, we can talk about the down years, but we can talk about the really, really rich years where, again, the top 1% of Oregonians are making millions and millions of dollars on capital gains. And on those years, we should be able to take that money and put it into the reserve to cover the down years. Because yes, that is the boom and bust cycle of people who make lots and lots of money selling stocks, bonds, and other assets.
So if this were to pass, and you look at who is selling their homes right now, I mean, I have aging in-laws who are at end of life. Their one asset is their primary residence. They will be selling that to pay for the medical care for his end-of-life cancer and her memory care for Alzheimer's. Every dime of that asset of their home will go to pay those bills. That isn't them being the top 1% of income earners. That's them being, veterans of the Army who have been just a homeowner. That's what they have to pay for their end-of-life care.
Do we know the breakdown of who's selling their homes these days in Multnomah County, like income level?
Oh, it's the full spectrum.
But on a year that
And
you
just
sell your
a
home,
point about this, if it was a tax on the top 1%, then it should have been designed as a tax on the top 1%. And to your question about an economic downturn, well, we are in it. And there is no necessary likelihood where we can resume and expect that we'll actually have population and economic growth in our region. And we are different as a region. We are not like other places. Our recovery is vastly slower than every other part of this nation. So all those points there are well taken. Should have designed this as a top 1% tax. Should have excluded issues like home ownership and the sale of it. You should have excluded retirement accounts and not impacted individuals who are at their end of life. These are all completely rational perspectives, and yet every single one of them is built into this ballot measure and will become law if voters say yes.
Right, talking about seniors and end of care life, right? The amount of seniors who are renters who are being evicted is high. It is one of the highest populations that are being pushed out of into homelessness through evictions because they are on fixed incomes. I hear the point about the concern over somebody who has owned a home over 30 years and the equity, right? The equity, we're talking about equity, has in Portland, right? A house that you have owned maybe for 25 years has gone upwards 300, let's even say to 500,000, right? On the year that family sells that home and earns $500,000, we are talking about $3,000, at the worst case scenario, $3,000 being taxed to pay for this.
But you don't know what their mortgage is. You don't know how they've refinanced to pay for
But that's what the
healthcare
profit
or
is.
college. You don't know if they have a profit until,
That's what the capital gains are. It's the profit of the sale. So whatever if you sell the house for $600,000, I agree. If you sell the house for $600,000, but you still owe $500,000 on it, then you have a profit of $100,000, and the capital gains is only that amount. But if you have lived in your home for many, many years, right, and you no longer have a mortgage, and you sell for whatever the profit is, the profit up to that's what's taxed.
Carol?
Does a 1031 exchange get you out of this?
No.
Do you still pay this even if you're 1031?
You pay for it, and then you can exchange the balance. And unless you know you owe this tax, you may have directed your 1031 to move all of those assets from one investment to another and not realize that there was a tax locally to pay. So no, the 1031 does not avoid this.
Colleen, do you know how many people were evicted last year? Not just were mentioned in eviction filings, but actually evicted?
No, there's no way to count that because we can't track people who are displaced through the notice of termination.
So we have no idea how many people were evicted last year.
We know that that there's good data that for every one eviction filing, there are five evictions outside of court. And so if we can take the numbers that make it to court and assume that there are 5 additional notices of termination, that those cases that would also benefit from this. So the displacement level is very, very high.
And do we know how many people that are evicted actually end up homeless? Is that a figure you know?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Are there decent estimates?
Yes, there's lots of research on the impact of eviction on houselessness.
But we don't know how many people ended up homeless because they were evicted from Multnomah County last year or 2 years ago.
No, I
Well,
think
we had a
there's-
moratorium on evictions, so.
Sure,
We had-
prior to that
a more
and past that.
No, but I think all of the research shows that lots of people end up houseless because they've been evicted or have a very difficult time coming out of houselessness because they have a judgment of eviction on their record. It's the thing that landlords do not want to rent to again, less than almost any other of the causes or conditions of houselessness. Coming back from being evicted is really, really hard.
But we don't have hard
Absolutely
figures on
agree.
it.
I don't have them off the top of my head, but
Do they exist?
I'm sure they do. Yes.
Colleen, the No side has some data here. They say that Metro Supportive Housing Services provides more than $100 million, and that they've used these funds to provide free attorneys for nearly 600 households and prevent evictions for 9,348 households. Do you dispute any of those facts?
No, 537 is less than 1 month's worth of eviction filings. So no, I think that, the county is providing
And then-
less than, is providing 9% of tenants with evictions.
Right,
And
before the
Nigel's-
notification requirement kicked in.
And then Nigel's additionally done some reporting about the high administrative costs. Do you dispute any of his reporting?
If
The cost of administering this could amount to half of the take?
And that's collection. That is not administration. It's purely
Just
the cost to
collecting,
collect
correct.
the actual
So I'm just
tax.
wondering, do you challenge any of that?
I think that there are other ways to collect the tax, yes.
How?
The-
On the state,
The state says they don't want to do it.
Correct.
they have said that they haven't wanted to do it before, but there are
They were
legislators who
asked about
were,
this one and said they don't want to do it.
like all of them, you just sat down and asked all of them?
The county asked for an estimate to collect this one, and the state said, no.
The
we're not
only
gonna do
respondent
that.
was the city, and the city has made a very clear determination about the cost of collection, and a memo has been produced
So
to the
my
county.
question is, is the value of this program so important that it's worth spending 50 cents of every dollar that comes in just to administer it? Because, can you make the case that it doesn't matter how expensive it is, the need is so great that even if 50 cents of every dollar doesn't go for lawyers to provide defense, but simply goes to bureaucrats to collect this, it's still worth it?
I think it is ludicrous to think that that it would cost the city that much to collect a tax that
So you
already.
are challenging the facts in Nigel's story. That's what I asked at the time.
Well, no, I'm not Nigel's story, but the fact that that money is like phone calls and the other thing. What I don't dispute from that report is that the very small amount of people that this impacts, right? So that's the report that says that this will impact less than 8% of Multnomah County residents and less than 15% of Multnomah County taxpayers.
So, I'm sorry, are you saying that the city's Department of Revenue, which currently collects the county's business income tax, has done that for, I think, close to 3 decades, the preschool for all tax, the Metro Homeless Services tax, the arts tax, all these various taxes we have, are unable to estimate how much it's going to cost to do the follow-up required to let people know they owe this and how to file it, which they have experience in doing for decades now.
Yeah, I think continuing to do all of those individually continues to be really expensive. I think that we can there's a new way to collect all of the local taxes, and that the city could save, if the city is going to do it, the city could save money by not doing these individual tax forms. Other jurisdictions collect local taxes in other ways.
And not a single other jurisdiction implements a capital gains tax, and it is absolutely valid what the city is saying. And I would go so far as to say, truly the city may not even be able to have. There's a reason it's so expensive. No other place in the country does a local capital gains tax.
What-
We would be the first in the entire country.
What makes
to
a
do it.
capital gains tax more expensive than a tax on wages? That is what general funds are. You are asking,
That is actually 100% inaccurate. General funds are property taxes and business taxes. There are no general funds derived from income tax.
From Multnomah County.
Just out of curiosity, so
But
If you don't
what is
mind.
more expensive? What's more expensive about collecting this? Like, what makes a capital gains tax more expensive to collect?
Why don't you ask the city? That is what they said.
Well, it's pretty obvious that they don't know who's going to pay it, because you can have a lot of people who have minimal or no income who are going to end up paying it at some point. It's not like It's not like a Metro supportive housing services measure or a preschool for all measure, which they're based on state taxable income at the state level. So that it's very easy to know who owes that tax. It's very hard to know who owes this tax because you don't have the same calculation appearing anywhere else. It's unique.
Capital gains are already, if you make capital gains and you live in Oregon, you report that.
You report them as regular income.
And you don't report
Capital
this.
gains in Oregon are taxed as regular income.
And you certainly don't report this version of capital gains. There are absolutely federal rules, and most people play by those, but this is expansive and collects a vastly greater amount of capital gains than no other place does. So yeah, this is all new. This is innovative in terms of the way it's taxing.
Hey, Aaron, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'm curious about something that also was in Nigel's reporting in a different story, which is the possibility that the 0.75 tax rate could be raised or lowered depending on whether or not it's collecting the amount needed to fund the program. Why is that in the measure?
All taxes are adjustable. There's nothing that's more or less adjustable about it. Okay.
All 10.
Not, okay.
When voters approve levies, for example, that's a specific rate that voters are approving that will not change without another vote of.
This would require the county commissioners to vote to increase or decrease the tax. The purpose of that was, if we look at the data from all of the programs that look like this, right to council programs, is it decreases the amount of evictions in our community. The desire is that as evictions decrease, that the rate would be able to decrease accordingly. The only way that this should increase is if the need, because of the rate of evictions, also increases. But the purpose is that the program pays for the systematic change to decrease the amount of eviction in our community, thereby decreasing the need. Do we think we'll get it to zero?
How would you grade that, given that you don't actually know how many people are being evicted right now?
We know how many cases make it to court, and we can see, a decrease in filings matters, a decrease in judgments, a decrease in filings, and then a decrease in notices of termination. And we will be able to see it because this program would require landlords for the first time to file notices of termination so that we can know. That is the thing, that's one of the things that is really important about our program that's not anywhere else, is that it is available to people at the notice of termination stage, and we will be able to see the actual amount of displacement that is happening and not just at the court.
If you were to do this all over again with a desire to pass some sort of tax to raise money, would you do it differently? Knowing what you'd know now, 2 years after you started? And I realize, we're pinning this all on you. I realize you're not...
The me versus the two paid and one little volunteer.
We understand that, but I'm just wondering.
Would I do it differently?
Yeah. With the same goal, the same end, but would you come at it differently?
I think capital gains, I think the actual way that capital gains exist as a driver of inequality in our community makes it an important way. Would I change some words in the ballot and save myself a bunch of heartache? Yeah, probably. But I also think that those small word changes, the loopholes and the word changes that we're really driving at here are absolutely available to the county commissioners to fix.
But correct me if I'm wrong, I get a sense that if your group could have gone to the county and said the county will dedicate $8 million a year moving forward, you'd still go forward with this because you so like the idea
Oh no.
going after capital gains as a form of income inequality.
No, I disagree. No, sorry, that's not the question you asked. If that question is, I have a different answer to. No, me and the group behind this want eviction representation for all. If we saw another way, a viable way to get there without bringing money to pay for a program, I think we would absolutely do that. I said this in another interview. I invite the county commissioners to beat us to the punch. They do have the ability to. They've had the ability for 2 years. I implore them to beat us to the punch and undercut this completely. Make this program real. Don't continue to fund the program that already exists that isn't working. The program we have right now, too many people are accessing it. It's not working. Take everything we wrote in the ballot, take everything about the program and use any money to do it. But for 2 years we've been saying that. For 2 years we've been pushing on that, and they haven't done it. And so no, I want eviction representation for all, and I was told you have to pay for it. And so this is the best way we could come up to pay for it. But that's the
Did
purpose.
the county say that?
Yeah,
I
who
know
told
current
you?
chair,
Yeah.
Peggy Peterson, came out against this while you were still gathered, while you were still, I think, in the challenge period. So had not committed to putting on the ballot yet and called this a sledgehammer to drive a nail. So clearly had concerns at the outset. Was there a follow-up conversation with her too, or someone else at the county who controls these homeless services dollars to rededicate those funds?
So here's what all the county commissioners said when we spoke with them. We absolutely support your measure. You have to find a way to pay for it. Unfortunately,
It's absolutely.
No.
They're on record.
They're-
All three that ran for county chair declared publicly in April that they were opposed to the measure.
that they're opposed to this. Yes, because of the tax, because
You
the
just said they were supportive of it.
But I think.
Of the
I think
program, sorry.
You're talking about the concept of an
Yes.
eviction representation program, I understand.
so that they're supportive of the program, that you have to find a way to pay for it, and that at this time they could not publicly support an increase in tax because the powers that be, the PBA, have made it very clear that no more taxes would be politically accepted. I don't have to make those political calculations, right? I don't have to say, will I forego important programs because the Portland Business Alliance is telling me do not raise any more taxes this year. Like, I don't have to make that decision.
Well, so what is, I look at this list of people who are on the other side, not on your side, and, Carmen Rubio, can't think of someone who's got better progressive credentials, who cares more about income inequality. What is she missing? She's obviously stupid because she's on the wrong side of this, so what is she missing?
I don't think that's true. I think that she has to make political calculations based on who's going to donate to her campaign in
So
the
you
future.
think she's just being a politician and...
Yeah, I think that the people who do support the 60 endorsing organizations that do support this, right, are the workers, our faith communities, our tenants organizations, our community, our like Unite Oregon, the Urban League, right? These are people who are fighting to keep people in their houses.
Did
And
you
we
guys
don't
say
have-
Apano?
Apano, Hacienda,
Hacienda.
CDC.
Why do you think
Black
Apano
Business
and
Organization.
Hacienda CDC wouldn't?
Hacienda CDC is a landlord. They're on record evicting people. They're a community development corporation. They are a landlord. If you look up the records, and they use one of the property management that has some of the highest eviction rates, right? Like Hacienda CDC is a landlord.
What about
Let's just
Apano?
Say that. I think Apano, I don't know why, but I do know that the populations that are evicted the most, the populations with the highest rates of evictions are Black communities in Multnomah County and Native communities in Multnomah County, and
So you think they oppose it because those are not the groups that they represent?
I don't know, but I know that Urban League and Unite Oregon strongly do support this because they see how hard it is for people to stay in their homes once they have an eviction notice against them.
I do want to point out on the endorsement, it's a really great question, and I would be thrilled if the PBA was all-powerful and could always oppose tax measures. But this is the first time that all 5 city commissioners and the mayor opposed a new tax measure. The majority of the Multnomah County Commissioners, including its chair, Metro Council President Earl Blumenauer, run the gamut up to state treasurer, and then you include community groups, representatives, of course, of Apano and Hacienda, and also the Black Business Association of Oregon. I think everybody is joining together at this point and saying, to that question you asked earlier, we have jumped the shark on this one. We are overtaxed. We are putting up barriers to home ownership right at the moment when communities are looking to access all of this. So you're looking for the first time unity amongst the community in opposing a new measure because we understand what the pitfalls here, and we are unified in opposition to this. And it is something to see, and it is a good question with Carmen Rubio and with Earl Blumenauer.
Did the group that put this together, you talked about the 20 or so people with legal, it's sort of some of the same people who did PSEF?
Not to my knowledge.
Different group?
Was there an overlap with the group that did kindergarten for all? Sorry, preschool.
Preschool for all. There was some, yes.
No, Universal Preschool Now there's some crossover there. The Preschool for All is the county-led task force, so they came
Yeah,
together.
it was
and
kind of, it was
Well,
kind of
DSA.
Correct.
DSA, Mary King,
Yeah.
who's the economist, Mary King. Yeah.
Here's a question that is probably irrelevant, but sort of interests me.
We'll be the judge of that.
What a setup.
Do we even have enough lawyers in Oregon to represent people? We don't have enough defense
Great
attorneys.
question.
That is a really wonderful point of view.
Like, let's say we get the money, and that the money collection goes well, and that all the hurdles that have been discussed here are irrelevant for some reason. Stipulate that. We can't find enough lawyers to represent criminal defendants.
And the county's required to contract with 5 entities, not may, but shall contract with 5. So
I'm just kind of wondering where we're going to find them.
And it's not just attorneys, it's also the paralegals that support public defenders. So this is not just
I never thought I'd say this, but maybe we need more lawyers.
because a solution to a problem is always more lawyers.
So, there's a simple answer to this, which is the Oregon State Bar this year recognized that civil court, including eviction court, can and should be able to be represented by professional paralegals. There are lots of people who could do this work well without having to go to law school. And we don't think that more people should take on the financial burdens of going to law school when being a trained professional paralegal is right there. So we're really, really grateful, and we worked with the Oregon State Bar. We gave testimony in support of that change, the important change that would allow paralegals to represent tenants. And so that benefit has already existed primarily for landlords because they're allowed to be represented by agents. Yes, many of them hire landlords. There are a few law firms that represent many landlords, but they also have the option to hire somebody called an agent. Tenants don't have that. That's another disparity. It's another one of those things that landlords have a right that tenants don't have. And so there are changes that have gone into place that would allow paralegals to do that. And that's where we think, yeah, if we need about 50 paralegals and 5 managing lawyers, that's how we'll do it. And so we're not taking away from criminal defense. It is a new group of people, people who work at Unite Oregon, people who work at Community Alliance of Tenants, which is one of the other endorsing organizations. These are the places where people go and want to have support. And so those teams will be able to hire teams of professional paralegals to represent tenants in eviction court. So it's not going to take away. We don't need 50 lawyers. We need to hire trained paralegals.
So this measure affects Multnomah County only.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't have taken a whole lot more effort to get a few more signatures and put this on the ballot statewide. Now, is the reason why you didn't do it because there isn't a need for eviction representation statewide, or was it just a political calculation that we're more likely to pass this in left-leaning Multnomah County than we are in the rest of the state of Oregon?
No, it was a capacity question. Where were we? And this is where the people who wanted to fight for this were. We've been talking with community partners outside and other places in Oregon, and they're really excited to implement something like this. Yes, this is absolutely needed across the state of Oregon. It was neither. It was just a matter of where we thought we could get it done.
So we've reached a little over an hour since we started the conversation. So it's 2:20. I think we probably ought to wrap this up.
Yeah, Colleen, is there anything we haven't asked you that you would like to say or to summarize?
Yeah, that evictions are incredibly harmful and cost our community a ton. We are already paying the cost of evictions. There's a great report. University of Arizona put out a tool that lets people estimate the cost of evictions. Professors Dr. Marisa Zapata and Lisa Bates ran the cost of evictions in Oregon using that tool. And the downstream, what we're already paying way outweighs what the cost to provide legal representation would cost. This is a 2-year effort because nothing else because it wasn't being done. 9% of representation is unacceptable and isn't working. This is a 2-year campaign backed by hundreds of people in the community. We've gathered over 33,000 signatures to say that this is an important issue, and if we have to pay for it, this is how we want to pay for it. this is how we could pay for it. If there was another way, and it would have been done already, and unfortunately it hasn't. And so what we have is a vote on May 16th to say that a proven solution should be brought to the community to prevent the harm of eviction and the cost to our community.
Great, thank you. Would you guys like to summarize your opposition?
Yeah, absolutely. We encourage voters to vote no on this measure. I think process matters. The cause is there, and we would have been pleased to work together to advance the policy work around this as a community to make sure that individuals who are being evicted do have representation. But ultimately, we have got to have higher standards for what we're putting in front of voters. When we are putting in jeopardy the viability of our housing market, impacting seniors, small businesses, our regional economy, we cannot go down this path. And we have to do this work together. We have got to stop dividing this community and making this not only an uncompetitive place economically speaking, but an inviable place to live because it is so expensive, and to further degrade our actual housing market. We need voters to come together to work together on solutions that work, that are tested, and not introduce completely improvised concepts that threaten the ability to address the actual issues, such as the cost of housing, the ability to be a small business owner, the ability to grow old here and to retire and to afford it. We ask people to have higher standards for when they put things on the ballot.
Great, well, thank you all for coming in.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.